The scream tore through the house like a blade, sharp and unyielding, pulling me from the haze of a Saturday morning coffee. I froze, the mug trembling in my hands, as my son Ethan's voice cracked with panic from upstairs. "Dad, you need to see this now." My name is David Harper, a 45-year-old single father living in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. Life had settled into a predictable rhythm: work at the community college, dinners with Ethan, and the occasional beer with old friends. Ethan, my 21-year-old son, was home from college for the summer, bringing with him a guest I hadn't expected: his friend, Lucas. I'd met Lucas briefly before, a polite kid with sharp blue eyes and a quiet demeanor. But this weekend was the first time he'd stayed over. Something about his presence felt different, like a ripple in still water. But I brushed it off. Until that scream. I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding, and found Ethan standing outside the guest room, his face pale. "Dad, it's Lucas." I don't know what's happening." The door was ajar, and inside, Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clutching a small, leather-bound journal. His eyes were red, his breathing uneven, like he'd been running from something only he could see. Papers were scattered across the floor, some crumpled, others torn, as if a storm had erupted in the small room. "Lucas, what's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. He didn't look up, just gripped the journal tighter, his knuckles white. Ethan hovered behind me, his worry palpable. I stepped closer, noticing the faint tremble in Lucas's shoulders. This wasn't just a bad morning. Something had broken open, something raw and real, and I had no idea how it would change us all. I knelt beside him, careful not to touch the scattered papers. "Hey, talk to me. Whatever it is, we're here." My voice was softer now, the way I used to speak to Ethan when he was younger, scared of thunderstorms. Lucas's eyes flicked up, meeting mine for the first time. They were wide, vulnerable, like a deer caught in headlights. "I didn't mean for you to see this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't want anyone to know." Ethan stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Know what? Man, you're freaking me out." Lucas's gaze dropped back to the journal, and he hesitated, as if weighing whether to let us in or shut us out forever. Finally, he opened the journal, revealing pages filled with tight, hurried handwriting. "It's about me," he said, his voice breaking. "About who I am." I didn't understand yet, but the weight of his words settled over me like a heavy fog. Lucas was carrying something he'd kept hidden, something that had spilled out in this room and now threatened to upend everything. I glanced at Ethan, who looked as lost as I felt, and realized this weekend was no longer about catching up or casual hangouts. It was about truths we weren't prepared for. As Lucas began to speak, his voice trembling but resolute, I braced myself. He told us about growing up in a small town in Idaho, where being different wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. He talked about his parents, devout and unyielding, who saw his identity as a sin to be fixed. He was gay, he said, the words spilling out like a confession he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. The journal was his lifeline, a place where he poured out his fears, his hopes, and the love he'd never dared to speak aloud. Ethan's face softened, but I could see the shock in his eyes. He'd known Lucas for years, but this was new, raw, and heavy. I felt a pang of guilt for not noticing sooner, for assuming Lucas was just another college kid with a quiet streak. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lucas shook his head. "I couldn't. Not until now. Not until I had to." The journal, he explained, wasn't just a diary. It was a letter to himself, to his family, to the world he wasn't sure would accept him. He'd been writing it for years, hiding it from everyone. But last night, alone in the guest room, he'd started tearing pages out, overwhelmed by the weight of keeping it secret. That's when Ethan had walked in, seeing the chaos and calling for me. I sat back, trying to process it all. Lucas wasn't just Ethan's friend. He was a young man fighting a battle I couldn't fully understand. But I knew one thing. He was in my home, under my roof, and he was hurting. "You're safe here," I said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." Lucas looked at me, his eyes searching for something acceptance. Maybe, or just a promise that I meant it. He nodded slowly, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. I glanced at the scattered papers, catching fragments of his handwriting. "I'm tired of hiding. I want to be enough." My heart ached for him, for the weight he'd carried alone. Ethan sat beside Lucas, his hand resting on his friend's shoulder. "We'll figure this out, okay?" he said, his voice steady now. "You don't have to go through this by yourself." It was a moment of quiet strength, a reminder of the man my son was becoming. But as I looked at Lucas, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The guest room, with its torn pages and raw truths, was just the first crack in a much larger story, one that would test us all. That night, the house felt heavier, as if Lucas's confession had thickened the air. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying his trembling voice, the way his hands clutched that journal like it was his only anchor. Downstairs, the kitchen clock ticked too loudly, a reminder that time wasn't stopping for us to catch up. I found Ethan in the living room, sprawled on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "You okay?" I asked, sitting across from him. He didn't answer right away, just rubbed his eyes like he was trying to erase the day. "I should have known. Dad," he said finally. "He's my best friend. How did I miss this?" I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that people hide what they're afraid to show, but the words felt hollow. Instead, I said, "He's still Lucas. He's just letting you see more of him now." Ethan nodded, but his jaw was tight, like he was wrestling with something bigger than guilt. "What if he gets hurt?" he asked. "His parents, they're not like you." That hit me hard. I'd raised Ethan alone since his mom left when he was 5. We weren't perfect, but we'd built a home where he could be himself. Lucas didn't have that. His parents, from what he'd shared, saw his identity as a betrayal of their faith. I couldn't imagine looking at my son and seeing anything less than love. The next morning, Lucas was quieter, his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. He helped with breakfast, cracking eggs with a careful precision that felt like an apology. I wanted to tell him he didn't owe us anything, but I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us. Instead, I kept things light, asking about his classes, his plans for the summer. He answered politely, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. After breakfast, Ethan suggested they go for a walk, maybe to clear their heads. I watched them leave, Lucas's journal tucked under his arm like a shield. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved from porches. But I wondered how it looked through Lucas's eyes, a world that might not welcome him as easily as it did Ethan. While they were gone, I cleaned the guest room, gathering the scattered papers with care. I didn't read them, though the temptation was there. They weren't mine to touch. Not really. But one page, half torn, caught my eye. I want to tell him. I want to be brave. My stomach twisted. Was him Ethan? Someone else? I pushed the thought away, folding the papers and placing them on the nightstand. When they returned, Ethan was laughing, a sound that cut through the tension like sunlight. Lucas was smiling too, A real smile this time, though it flickered like a candle in the wind. We ran into Mrs. Carter, Ethan said, grinning. She tried to recruit us for her book club again. Lucas chuckled, and for a moment, they were just two college kids, not carrying the weight of the world. But the moment didn't last. That afternoon, Lucas's phone buzzed incessantly, and his face tightened with each notification. "It's my mom," he said, his voice flat. "She wants to know when I'm coming home." Ethan and I exchanged a glance. Home, for Lucas, wasn't a safe word. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. Lucas shook his head, but his fingers traced the edge of his journal, a nervous habit I was starting to recognize. "They don't know," he said quietly. "They think I'm normal." The word hung in the air, sharp and wrong. Ethan's face hardened. "You are normal, Lucas. They're the ones who don't get it." I wanted to agree, to tell Lucas he was enough, but I could see he wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, I offered to make dinner, something to keep my hands busy and give him space. As I chopped vegetables, I heard them talking in the living room, their voices low but intense. Ethan was asking questions, and Lucas was answering, his words halting but honest. I caught fragments: fear of rejection, a crush he'd never acted on, the hope of a life where he didn't have to hide. By the time dinner was ready, the air felt lighter, like a storm had passed. Lucas even laughed at one of Ethan's terrible jokes, and I saw a spark of the kid I'd met years ago, the one who'd teased Ethan about his bad taste in music. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something bigger, something that would demand more than a weekend to resolve. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my own life, how I'd built walls around my heart after Ethan's mom left, how I'd told myself it was to protect him. Lucas's courage, even in his fear, was a mirror I wasn't ready to face. But I knew one thing: I wanted to be the kind of father, the kind of man, who could help him feel safe. For the first time in years, my routine felt fragile, like it could crack open and reveal something new. Sunday morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of Portland weather that made you want to stay inside with a book. But the tension in the house was louder than the rain tapping the windows. Lucas was up early, sitting at the kitchen table with his journal open, writing furiously. I didn't ask what he was writing. It felt like intruding on sacred ground. Ethan joined us, his hair a mess, his eyes still carrying yesterday's weight. "You sleep okay?" he asked Lucas, who shrugged. "Enough." The word was clipped, but there was a softness in his gaze when he looked at Ethan, like he was grateful for the question. I busied myself with coffee, giving them space, but my ears caught every word. "I'm sorry I freaked you out yesterday," Lucas said, his pen stilling. "I didn't plan to, spill everything." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Don't apologize, man. I'm glad you told me. I just wish you didn't have to carry all that alone." I watched them, my chest tight with pride and worry. Ethan was trying so hard to be there for his friend, but I could see the strain in his shoulders, the way he was grappling with how to help. Lucas, meanwhile, seemed caught between relief and fear, like he'd opened a door he wasn't sure he could close again. The day passed slowly, each moment heavy with unspoken questions. Lucas's phone kept buzzing, and each time, his face grew tighter. Finally, he silenced it, shoving it into his pocket with a force that made me wince. "They're relentless," he muttered, and I didn't need to ask who he meant. His parents were a shadow hanging over him, even here. I suggested a movie to lighten the mood, something mindless with explosions and bad one-liners. Ethan picked an old action flick, and for a couple of hours, we laughed and groaned at the terrible dialogue. Lucas even relaxed a little, his shoulders loosening as he teased Ethan about his love for cheesy movies. But when the credits rolled, the weight returned, heavier than before. "I need to tell them," Lucas said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. Ethan and I turned to him, startled. "My parents," he clarified, his hands twisting together. "I can't keep pretending. But I don't know how." His voice cracked, and I saw the fear in his eyes, fear of rejection, of losing the only family he had. Ethan reached out, his hand hovering before settling on Lucas's arm. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "We'll figure it out together." The words were simple, but they carried a promise, one I hoped Ethan could keep. I wanted to say something, to offer wisdom or reassurance, but all I could manage was, "You're stronger than you think, Lucas. And you've got us." He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was already imagining the conversation with his parents. I could picture it to a cold living room in Idaho. Raised voices. Tears. Maybe worse. I'd never met Lucas's parents, but his fear told me enough. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from that pain, but I knew I couldn't. All I could do was be here, in this moment, and hope it was enough. That afternoon, Lucas asked to use my laptop. "I need to write something," he said, his voice steady but quiet. I set him up in the study, giving him privacy, but I couldn't shake the image of him hunched over the keyboard, pouring his heart into words he might never send. Ethan stayed close, lingering in the doorway like a sentinel, ready to step in if Lucas needed him. When Lucas emerged, his face was pale but resolute. "I wrote the letter," he said, holding up a single sheet of paper. "It's not perfect, but it's honest." He handed it to Ethan, who read it in silence, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, almost reverent. Wow," Ethan said, handing it back. "You're brave, Lucas. Really." I didn't ask to read it. It wasn't my place. But I saw the way Lucas's shoulders squared, like he'd taken a step towards something bigger than himself. "I'm not sending it yet," he said. But I needed to write it, to know I could. That night, as we ate dinner, the conversation turned to lighter things: college, music, plans for the fall. But beneath it all, there was a current of change, a sense that we were all standing on the edge of something new. Lucas was still scared, still uncertain, but he wasn't alone anymore. And as I watched him and Ethan laugh over a shared memory, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could help him find his way. The rain stopped by Monday morning, leaving the air crisp and the streets glistening. Lucas was set to leave that afternoon, his backpack already packed by the guest room door. But the house felt different now, like it had absorbed his story and was holding it close. I caught him staring out the window, his journal in his lap, and wondered what he was seeing: home, or something he couldn't yet name. Ethan was quieter too, his usual energy tempered by the weekend's weight. He'd been texting Lucas's other friends, trying to rally support without betraying his confidence. "I just want him to know he's got people," he told me when Lucas was out of earshot. I nodded, proud of his instinct to protect, but worried about how much he was taking on. Over breakfast, Lucas broke the silence. "I'm going to tell them when I get back," he said, his voice steady but low. "My parents. I can't keep hiding." Ethan's fork paused midair, and I set down my coffee, searching for the right words. "That's a big step," I said finally. "How can we help?" Lucas looked surprised, like he hadn't expected the offer. "I don't know," he admitted. I need to do it in person. They deserve that much." His voice wavered, but there was a resolve in it, a fire I hadn't seen before. Ethan leaned forward. You sure? You don't owe them anything if they're going to hurt you. The words hung heavy, and I saw the conflict in Lucas's eyes. He loved his parents, even if they didn't understand him. I thought about my own parents, long gone, and how I'd fought to be the father I wished I'd had. If you need a place to go after, I said, our door's open. Always. Lucas nodded, his eyes glistening. Thanks, Mr. Harper. That means a lot. It was the first time he'd called me by name all weekend, and it felt like a small victory, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. After breakfast, Ethan and Lucas went for one last walk, their voices fading as they headed down the street. I stayed behind, cleaning up, but my mind was on Lucas. I imagined him standing in his parents' living room, his letter in hand, trying to explain who he was to people who might not listen. It made my chest ache, a mix of anger and helplessness. When they returned, Lucas's mood had shifted. He was quieter, but there was a lightness to him, like he'd made peace with something. Ethan helped me practice, he said, a shy smile tugging at his lips. I think I can do this. Ethan grinned, but I saw the worry in his eyes, the same worry I felt. We were sending Lucas back to a battle we couldn't fight for him. As we drove to the bus station, the car was filled with a strange mix of hope and dread. Lucas sat in the back, his journal clutched to his chest, his eyes fixed on the passing trees. Ethan kept up a stream of chatter, trying to keep things light, but I could feel the tension building. When we pulled up to the station, Lucas turned to me. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. I wanted to say more, to tell him he was brave, that he was enough. But all I managed was, take care of yourself, Lucas, and call us if you need us. He nodded, and for a moment, our eyes locked, a silent promise passing between us. Ethan hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that said more than words could. As Lucas boarded the bus, I saw him glance back, his expression a mix of fear and determination. The bus pulled away, and Ethan and I stood there, watching until it disappeared around the corner. Back home, the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Ethan went to his room, and I sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Lucas had sat. I thought about the journal, the torn pages, the weight of a truth he'd carried alone for so long. I hoped he'd find the strength to face his parents, to demand the love he deserved. And I hoped, more than anything, that he'd come back to us if he needed a safe place to land. That night, Ethan came downstairs, his phone in hand. He texted, he said, his voice tight. He's home. He's going to talk to them tomorrow. I nodded, my throat tight. Tomorrow would change everything for Lucas, for Ethan, for all of us. And as I looked at my son, I realized this weekend had already changed us, in ways we were only beginning to understand. The next morning, I woke to a text from Lucas. I'm doing it today. Wish me luck. My heart sank, a mix of pride and dread twisting in my chest. I showed the message to Ethan, who was already up, pacing the kitchen. He's really doing it, he said, his voice a mix of awe and worry. What if they kick him out? I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hope Lucas's parents would see the courage in their son, the same courage I'd seen in the guest room. But hope felt fragile, like a thread stretched too thin. Ethan spent the day checking his phone, jumping at every notification, while I tried to keep us busy with chores, anything to distract from the waiting. By evening, there was still no word. Ethan was restless, his usual easygoing nature replaced by a quiet intensity. I should have gone with him, he said, staring out the window. I put a hand on his shoulder. You're doing what you can. He knows you're here. But the words felt hollow, even to me. Waiting was its own kind of torture. Finally, around 9 p.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. He grabbed it, his face paling as he read. "He did it," he said, his voice shaking. "He told them." I leaned closer, trying to read his expression. And Ethan handed me the phone, and I saw Lucas's message. They didn't take it well. "I'm okay, but I need to get out of here. Can I come back?" My heart clenched. I typed a quick reply, "You're always welcome here. Let us know when you're coming." Ethan was already grabbing his keys. "I'm going to get him," he said, his voice fierce. I didn't argue. I knew that Luke's son was determined, and nothing would stop him. The drive to Idaho was 5 hours, and Ethan left that night, promising to keep me updated. I stayed up, unable to sleep, the house too quiet without him. I thought about Lucas, alone in a home that had rejected him, and felt a surge of anger at his parents. How could they not see the strength in their son, the heart it took to be honest? Ethan texted at 2 a.m. "Got him. He's shaken, but okay. Heading back." Relief flooded me, but it was tempered by the reality of what Lucas had faced. When they arrived just before dawn, Lucas looked like a ghost of himself, pale, eyes hollow, his journal clutched tightly. Ethan guided him inside, his arm around Lucas's shoulders like a shield. "Tell me what happened," I said gently, once they were settled on the couch. Lucas took a shaky breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said I'm not their son anymore. That I'm broken." The word cut through me, sharp and cruel. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting Lucas speak. "They didn't yell," Lucas continued. "That's what made it worse. They just shut down, like I was already gone." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. I grabbed my stuff and left. I didn't know where else to go. "You did the right thing," I said, my voice firm. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it." Lucas looked at me, his eyes searching, and I saw a flicker of hope beneath the pain. Ethan squeezed his shoulder, a silent promise of support. We set Lucas up in the guest room again, this time with a sense of permanence. As I watched him unpack his small bag, I realized this wasn't just about giving him a place to stay. It was about giving him a chance to rebuild, to find a family that saw him for who he was. And as I looked at Ethan, standing by his friend's side, I knew we were in this together. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the road ahead. Lucas would need more than a roof over his head. He'd need time, support, maybe even a fight to reclaim his place in the world. But for now, he was here, safe, and that was enough. The routine I'd clung to for years was gone, replaced by something messier, more human. And I wouldn't have it any other way. The days that followed were a delicate dance of giving Lucas space and letting him know he wasn't alone. He was quiet, spending hours in the guest room, writing in his journal or staring out the window. But there were moments, small ones, where I saw him start to breathe again. A laugh at Ethan's terrible cooking, a shy thank you when I brought him coffee. Ethan was a rock, always checking in, dragging Lucas into video games or late-night talks on the porch. I could see the bond between them deepening, a friendship forged in fire. But I also saw something else, something unspoken. The way Lucas's eyes lingered on Ethan, the way Ethan's voice softened when he spoke to him. I wondered if they saw it too, or if it was too soon, too raw. One afternoon, I found Lucas in the backyard, sitting under the old oak tree, his journal open. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, holding 2 mugs of tea. He nodded, scooting over to make room. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Finally, he spoke. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," If I'd waited, or said it better, you were honest. I said, that's more than most people manage. You can't control how they react. He looked at me, his eyes older than his 21 years. I just wanted them to love me, he said, his voice breaking. I set my mug down, fighting the urge to pull him into a hug. They might come around, I said. But if they don't, you've got people who already love you for who you are. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. I saw a spark of something hope, maybe, or the beginning of belief. That evening, Ethan suggested a barbecue, a way to reset the vibe, as he put it. We grilled burgers in the backyard, the air filled with laughter and the smell of charcoal. Lucas even joined in, teasing Ethan about his overcooked patties. It felt like a step toward normal, whatever that meant now. But the past wasn't done with us. A week later, Lucas got a call from his mom. He took it in the guest room, and when he came out, his face was unreadable. She wants to meet, he said. She says she's been thinking. Ethan's eyes lit up, but I felt a knot in my stomach. Hope was dangerous, especially when it came with strings. We talked it through over dinner. Lucas was torn, wanting to believe his mom was ready to listen but afraid of another rejection. Ethan was cautious, protective, urging Lucas to set boundaries. You don't have to do this alone, he said, echoing the promise he'd made before. I offered to go with him, or to host the meeting here, but Lucas shook his head. I need to do this myself. But I'll come back after. The meeting was set for a coffee shop in a nearby town, neutral ground. The morning he left, Lucas was a bundle of nerves, his hands shaking as he zipped up his jacket. Ethan hugged him, longer than usual, and I saw that look again, the one that spoke of something more than friendship. Call us if you need us, I said, and he nodded, his journal tucked under his arm like a talisman. The wait was agonizing. Ethan and I tried to keep busy, but every hour felt like a lifetime. When Lucas finally texted, it was brief, it was okay. Not great, but not terrible. Coming back now. Relief washed over me, but I knew okay wasn't the whole story. When he walked through the door, he looked drained but steady. She listened, he said, sitting on the couch. She didn't understand. Not really, but she didn't shut me out either. She said she needs time. Ethan sat beside him, his relief palpable. That's something, he said. It's a start. I watched them, my heart full and heavy. Lucas was finding his way, one painful step at a time, and Ethan was right there with him. I didn't know what the future held for Lucas, for his family, for the unspoken thing growing between him and my son. But I knew we were building something here, a family not bound by blood but by choice. And that was worth everything. Weeks turned into months, and Lucas became a fixture in our home. The guest room was now his, filled with books, a few posters, and the journal that never left his side. He enrolled in online classes, determined to finish his degree, and got a part-time job at a local bookstore. Slowly, he was building a life, one where he could be himself. Ethan was his biggest cheerleader, always there with a joke or a late-night drive when Lucas needed to clear his head. I watched their friendship evolve, the lines between friend and something more blurring with every shared glance, every quiet moment. I didn't push, didn't ask. It wasn't my place. But I saw the way Ethan lit up when Lucas smiled, the way Lucas leaned into Ethan's presence like it was home. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Lucas opened up about his mom's call. She'd reached out again, asking to meet. This time, she wanted to come to Portland. I said yes. Lucas told us, his voice steady but nervous. I want to believe she's trying. Ethan's face was a mix of hope and caution. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. Lucas nodded. "I have to be." The meeting was set for a Saturday, and Lucas spent the week preparing, writing in his journal, practicing what he'd say. Ethan and I offered to be there, but he wanted to do it alone. "You've already done so much," he said, his eyes soft with gratitude. "I need to take this step myself." When the day came, Lucas left for the coffee shop, his journal in hand. Ethan was a wreck, checking his phone every 5 minutes, pacing the living room. I tried to keep him calm, but I was just as nervous. What if she heard him again? What if she tried to pull him back into a world that didn't see him? When Lucas returned, he looked different, lighter, but not unburdened. "She's trying," he said, sitting at the kitchen table. "She doesn't get it. Not fully, but she said she wants to. She asked about my life, about you guys." His voice caught, and he looked at Ethan, then me. "She said she's proud of me, even if she doesn't understand." Ethan's eyes shone with tears, and he pulled Lucas into a hug. I felt my own throat tighten, a mix of relief and pride. Lucas's mom wasn't there yet, but she was reaching out, and that was more than he'd had before. "You did good," I said, my voice rough. "Really good." That night, we ordered pizza and watched another terrible movie, laughing until our sides hurt. Lucas was more himself than I'd ever seen, his smiles brighter, his laughter freer. And when he and Ethan sat close on the couch, their shoulders touching, I saw a spark I'd suspected all along. They weren't just friends anymore. Not entirely. Later, as I cleaned up, Ethan found me in the kitchen. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "I think I'm falling for him." The words hung there, honest and raw. I set down the dishes, turning to face him. "I know," I said, smiling. "And I think he feels the same. Just take it slow. He's been through a lot." Ethan nodded, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "I don't want to mess this up," he said. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You won't. Just be you. That's enough." As I went to bed that night, I thought about how far we'd come. Lucas was finding his place. Ethan was finding his heart. And I was learning to let go of the routine I'd clung to for so long. Our home was fuller now. Messier, but alive in a way it hadn't been before. And I knew, whatever happened next, we'd face it together. By fall, our house had settled into a new rhythm. Lucas was thriving, his confidence growing with every shift at the bookstore, every page he filled in his journal. Ethan was back at college, but he came home every weekend, his visits filled with laughter and late-night talks with Lucas. I watched them navigate their feelings, cautious but open, like two people learning to trust the ground beneath them. One crisp October evening, Lucas asked me to read something he'd written. It was a letter, not to his parents, but to himself, a promise to keep going, to keep being brave. "I couldn't have done this without you and Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "You gave me a home when I didn't have one." I didn't know what to say, so I hugged him, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. He wasn't just Ethan's friend anymore. He was family. And as I looked at him, I saw a young man who'd faced rejection and fear and come out stronger. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Ethan and Lucas's relationship deepened slowly, built on quiet moments and shared trust. They didn't put a label on it. Not yet. But I saw the way they looked at each other, the way their hands brushed when they thought I wasn't watching. It was love, tentative and new, but real. And it filled our home with a warmth I hadn't known I'd been missing. Lucas's mom visited again, this time for dinner at our house. It was awkward at first, her eyes flickering with uncertainty as she sat across from her son. But Lucas was patient, answering her questions, sharing pieces of his life. By the end of the night, she hugged him, tears in her eyes, and promised to keep trying. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for Lucas, that was enough. As winter approached, Lucas started talking about the future grad school, maybe, or opening his own bookstore someday. Ethan was right there, cheering him on, their dreams intertwining in ways that made my heart swell. I thought about the weekend that had started it all, the chaos in the guest room, the journal that held Lucas's truth. It had shattered my routine, yes, but it had given me something better, a family that chose each other. Every day. One night, as we sat by the fire, Lucas pulled out his journal and read a passage aloud. It was about love, not just romantic, but the kind that holds you up when the world tries to tear you down. That's what you've given me, he said, looking at Ethan, then me. A place to be myself. Ethan reached for his hand, and I saw the future in their clasped fingers, a life built on courage, on acceptance, on love that didn't ask for perfection. I thought about my own life, the walls I'd built, the routine I'd clung to. It was gone now, replaced by something messy and beautiful, something worth fighting for. As the fire crackled, I realized this was the ending I hadn't expected but always needed. Lucas wasn't just Ethan's friend who'd visited for a weekend. He was the spark that had changed us all, reminding us what it means to love fiercely, to stand together, to build a home where everyone belongs. And as I watched them laugh, their faces glowing in the firelight, I knew we'd be okay, more than okay. We'd be whole.